Today's episode of SBJ I Factor is sponsored by Pepsi. Joining us next on SBJ I Factor is Jeff Price, Chief Commercial Officer of the PGA of America. Jeff, in 1999, here was your write-up for your 40 under 40. In 2000, I have your write-up for SBJ's 40 under 40. And just to put it in perspective, in 1999, Jeff, you were on the same page with Susan O'Malley, who at that time ran the Washington Bullets and Washington Sports and Entertainment. You were also on the same page with Master P. Percy Miller. And in 2000, you were right next, adjacent, to Steve Phelps, who at that time was at NFL Properties. When we awarded you the 40 under 40, you were, of course, were at MasterCard, where you ran their sports sponsorships and events. So it's great to have you with us.
But great to be with you, and I remember that all so well. It was such an honor to be a part of that inaugural class, Abe. And I don't know if you remember in 2000, the ribbing I took from your host during the ceremony that happened that evening. But it was an honor then, and it's still an honor today. And the interesting part, and I think one of the things that's great about this industry, is both Susan O'Malley and Steve Phelps remain friends today, and they're people I greatly respect, and had an opportunity kind of through this to get to know in a much better way. And so the relationships you can build in this industry are incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and you were 34 when you were first awarded in 1999. And to your point, that was Robert Wool, who of course played Arliss. Who was the host of that year and gave you some good ribbing. But in the I Factor, Jeff, we really want to talk about personal and professional journeys. And I always figure it's best to start with your youth and growing up. And I want to ask about your youth in New England and how that influenced your path.
Well, Abe, I was fortunate. I played football and basketball kind of throughout, and ironically, never engaged in golf, the sport that I'm in today, until much later in life. But I was fortunate to have a great high school coach in football who really became a mentor. And one of the things, Abe, that I've realized that I've been incredibly fortunate at throughout my career is to have great mentors at each step along the way, and I'll maybe speak to that. And the idea of the mentor-mentee relationship and the two-way street that has to be in order for that to be successful. It started in high school, in high school football. Ultimately, had the opportunity to be a marginally decent D3 college football player. Spent probably more time in the training room and on crutches. But it gave me the passion, the understanding about team and the importance of team, and ultimately a passion for the sports world, and knew that there was a path that I probably wanted to take to be in sports. And I still have, after graduating from Bates, I had applied for internships at all 32 of the NBA teams. And I have a folder with all 32 rejection letters. And the interesting part is it was a bit of a motivation to figure out, all right, how do I, a kid from New Hampshire, find a path into this industry? And fortunately, that kind of led me to UMass and a friend and a mentor, Glenn Wong, who ultimately had a big impact on my life. And that program certainly did, and opened an opportunity to get a door to go to the NBA.
Well, that's a great path there, because you're talking about your early influencers. So obviously your football coach, and then Glenn Wong, who of course has influenced a lot of young people in the sports business today. So you get to UMass, you were in your early 20s, and that was a 2-year program, and then you went to, right?
It was an 18-month program, and then I ended up going to the NBA and started as an intern, graduate intern, and it was a humbling experience to take that internship on, but had an opportunity and a door opened to get a real job with them. And I think the point that I would say on that one, as young folks are thinking about getting into the industry, it really is important that you understand where you're going for those internship opportunities, and put everything into it that you can. You never know what's going to happen, but you can't just kind of show up and think that I'm doing this, I'm going to put it on my resume. I think that the reality for me and many others is when you get into those roles, you figure out how hard you can work and how can you create an opportunity. And so that's probably the best learning, Abe, that I had from that experience at the NBA. And obviously that was at the time of a great visionary leader and someone that I look up to, David Stern, who had a path. I was the 105th employee hired at the NBA, and was fortunate at the NBA to have a mentor, again, that theme coming back, of Rick Welts, who obviously has gone on to tremendous success, and somebody that I still think of as a friend, and had a huge influence early in my career. It kind of made me believe I could make it in New York.
Talk about some of the key career decisions that you faced. I mean, certainly accepting an internship where you weren't paid a lot in New York was a key career decision. What are some others?
So I would say the decision to leave the NBA and go to Gatorade was a fork in the road. I could have seen, and I think when I started, I probably saw myself always working within the NBA at some point. I had a love for both football and basketball, but the NBA, because of the leadership, kind of seemed like the sport that I would want to be in. But the opportunity to go to Chicago, to go to work for Quaker Oats, and really develop the brand marketing side of my career experience. And I think one of the things that I've been fortunate about to be able to do is, whether it was going to Gatorade or ultimately overseeing the MasterCard sports marketing portfolio, or then on the media side at Sports Illustrated and Sporting News, having different ways that I've expanded my horizons, ultimately leadership capabilities and expertise, which kind of has me in the position that I'm in today, that oversees all of that within the PGA of America, from media to marketing to communications to our foundation and fundraising. It all kind of stems from those decisions, that I didn't just stay in one single track, but ultimately looked at the best opportunity. And it wasn't about the money. And that's the other thing in sports. If you're just chasing the money, you're probably going to have a less than fulfilling career. But if you have the passion and you're looking for opportunity, I think this can be just a tremendous industry to work in.
Was there a lot of self-doubt whether you could take those risks, Jeff, in terms of going into other lines of the business? Or, because generally people get pretty comfortable in their lane, did you ever get nervous about getting outside of that lane?
Well, I think the fact that the switch from the NBA to Gatorade was a success gave me some confidence. The one challenge that I made, and you may remember this, after MasterCard, I went to a startup, Trackus, that ultimately, everything you see today in terms of player tracking and information and next gen stats, we were trying to do in 2000 and 2001 and 2002. But ultimately we failed miserably. And I think coming out of that experience, I learned a ton, but I was concerned that what's the next entry point back? How do I ultimately restart a career after failure? And I think one of the things that you learn is you just have to kind of get back up and say, okay, we're going to get after this again, and find, a great organization and a great group of people to be a part of a team. And I had that opportunity at Sports Illustrated, which was a great 8-year run, and had a lot of interesting influencers, guys like Dave Morris, who had a huge impact on me. And so ultimately, I do think there are those moments where you'll have doubt, no question. But you got to believe that tomorrow's going to be better than where you're at those low points, and try and find a way to get there.
You mentioned leaders. What are some of the attributes you've seen throughout your career in successful leadership?
Yeah, and so I'm a big believer, having again seen David just change the entire complexion of the NBA. I'll never forget David bringing us all together to talk about the new deal that was coming with NBC. The league had been with CBS for so long, and now the new deal is coming. And then him talking about, we're going to go to China, and we're going to make China the second most important market. So I think, vision as a leader is critically important. But if you only have vision and strategy and you don't figure out how to execute things, you can have great strategy, but if you don't execute, ultimately that's where things fall apart. The other part that I think is critically important, there's no I in team. And so it has to be about the group. It has to be about the mission. And, if you think about the best leaders today, it isn't about them. It is ultimately about the collective, the organizations they're representing, the teams and the folks they have around them, and empowering them to be the best that they can be. And I think, at 55 today versus that young guy in 99 that was so excited, what I've realized is the best part of the job is seeing the team succeed and seeing the folks that you have working with you, giving them and empowering them and coaching them to be successful is really where the rewards come from today.
And so how has your management style, leadership style, Jeff, changed in that vein?
I'd say, it became much more collaborative over the years, much more of a group opportunity as I brought more folks into, certainly at the PGA of America, our commercial team. But ultimately making sure that there's a two-way dialogue, open conversation, that there's very clear kind of everyone has not just the opportunity to be heard, but really bring what you have to the table and don't be afraid to share what you think is the best path forward. Have the facts, have the data, have the analytics to back it up. But there's no right answer that's dictated by one leader. It really, you have to work with your team to drive success. And I think that's what's changed, Abe, probably more so from 34 to 55.
So it sounds like you're a better, well, and a more improved listener or collaborator, where maybe in your 34-year-old days at MasterCard, it was a little bit more focused on what you can do.
Yeah, or this is the big idea. Let's just go do it.
Got it. Yeah.
And so
Yep.
how do you continue to have that kind of vision, but how do you invite everybody to help that vision become a reality?
Want to talk about hiring? What do you look for in a new hire?
Great question, Abe, and something that we've talked a lot about within the PGA of America. The first thing that I look for, and the first question, and I don't want to give away state secrets here, but the first question I always ask is, what is it about this opportunity that's in front of you that has you motivated and passionate to succeed? And understanding what is the motivating factor in someone wanting a role or an opportunity, to me, is critical. Because if it's you can tell a lot by somebody how they answer that first question of what is it that they want to join your organization or evolve to a new role. What is it about that's going to get them to be successful? Then I like to ask a lot of questions about how they think about both strategy and process. And so depending on the role, how do you work to build the best plans and the best concepts to go forward? And then how, back to the point about you can't have strategy without execution, how are you going to make sure that you get small wins and that you get the kind of steps that are necessary to drive success and meet goals? And so I think about it in those two contexts. And then I think, one of the things that's certainly in the context of this last, 10 months between COVID and our social awakening is to make sure that we are giving everyone an opportunity to have a seat at the table. And that's really important to me. When we get into finalists of who are we looking at, because I don't necessarily see everyone on the front end, but making sure as a leader that that we're interviewing a broad and diverse slate, that it's a fair opportunity for everyone, and then not worrying about where necessarily what somebody's educational background is, or ultimately kind of in a stereotypical way that golf has had, I think, challenges historically. That how do we open doors for talented and successful people to see a path forward in our game? And so that's right now playing a major role, Abe, in how I think about hiring in general and the interviewing process. How do we make sure that everyone has an opportunity to see a future in the game of golf?
Two elements to that. First, the biggest mistake you see people make in the interview process is?
Too much talking and not enough listening.
Totally agree.
Too much talking. And I think, I love to start with 2 or 3 simple questions and then let the candidate start to ask questions, talk about themselves, and really let that narrative unfold where they may have a sense of comfort. Oh, wow, the tough questions are over, but you can learn so much by listening. So I'm a big believer of succinct beginnings where you may ask certain questions and then let it unfold by the interviewee kind of sharing and asking questions of you and really listening to their direction or their passion for why they want to be a part of your organization.
And the candidate who has no questions for you is certainly that's a negative. That's a drawback.
That's a huge drawback. If you haven't done your homework,
Right.
and can't think of key questions. And I think the more challenging the question that I get, the better that person's going to be as a part of our team, because I want folks who are going to be willing to ask tough questions. So I think, Abe, the key is as you get into those conversations, you're giving that individual the opportunity to kind of dig into why they want to be a part of your organization, and ultimately how they think they can contribute. Their story is going to be a lot more interesting than what they hear from you.
And not regrets, but any what I would call your best failures, where a failure that you learned the most from, was it Trackus or was it somewhere else along the path?
So I think there were probably two, Abe. I think that Trackus was certainly a tremendous failure. I learned so much from a technology standpoint. The path that I've had that has overseen technology, working with a group of engineers and understanding a mindset that I really had never experienced, has paid dividends for a couple of decades since. Um, but I think that the other one might have been Sue Wellington was a tremendous influence in my life at Gatorade, and ultimately the decision that I made to leave Gatorade may have been a premature one, and probably was something, as I think back, I'm incredibly thrilled to be where I am today. So there's not a lot of regret, but I think when I think back about leaving an organization, leaving that Gatorade team and that Gatorade brand, and Sue's leadership and Bill Schmidt's leadership, I was in a terrific position, and may have gotten impatient. And I think about that, and tell folks sometimes you got to just deal with challenging environments and situations, and understand not everything's going to be perfect, but you got to see the positives, not just the challenges. And so those would be the two that I look back to and say, if I could do it over, I'd do the Trackus one again, but I might have stayed at Gatorade a little longer.
Yeah, and that was '94. I think you started at Gatorade. So I mean,
Yeah.
think of all the things they had going with. They had Michael Jordan, right, and so a pretty interesting portfolio.
It was a tremendous portfolio and a great brand.
And that gets back to, like, if you knew then what you know now, would you do anything different?
Um, I think as it relates to, I'll start with education. I think the greatest thing that's happened when I went through UMass at the time, it wasn't part of the business school. It was part of physical education. And Glenn and the professors did an amazing job, but you weren't connected with the Eisenberg School in the way that it is today. And so if I could go back in time, I would have had the UMass experience with Glenn and all those professors, but it would have been part of an MBA program that would have given me a broader breadth of general marketing and business kind of strategy and development. So I think educationally, if you're going to go the sports management route, which I'm a huge believer that, especially at the graduate level, it can be so helpful and a differentiator. I think doing it where you're connected to a business school or a law school that gives you expertise as well is a really important thing. And that's why programs like UMass and Eisenberg and ASU's program as a part of the Sandra Day O'Connell Law School really gives students such a great foundation and an ability to kind of think about what's my path forward, what skills am I going to bring to whomever I go to. And then I would say, I would have been a better coach and a better team manager earlier in my career. Back to our other conversation, I think that's probably the thing that I look at now, and think about the teams that I'm overseeing and trying to get the best out of them, and help them to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. I probably could have learned that earlier in life, and
Well,
probably been a better manager and a better leader for it.
that's a hard one. I want to move on to some quick hitters, and this kind of drafts off the previous question, but best career advice you ever received and the career advice you give young people now.
The best career advice I've ever gotten was follow your passion. It was a conversation that I had early in life. Actually, back with my high school football coach, and I was kind of thinking about a couple of ways that I could go, and would go back and visit him after college. And I was thinking about law school, but had the real desire to go the sports route. And I just remember he said, follow your passion. You know, you're not looking at this as a job. You're trying to build a career. And if you don't wake up every day passionate about what you're doing, it's going to be a job. And so that advice, I think, has always stuck with me. Follow your passion, be passionate about what you're doing, and be in a position that you can make as much of an impact as you can at each stop along the way. And so I think that's the advice that I go back to, Abe. You know, each time I think about where might I go when I had a choice between the PGA of America and an opportunity in the technology space about 7 years ago, I followed my passion and ended up here at the PGA of America. And certainly the dollars probably would have been significantly better on the other side, but I can't think of a more rewarding role and experience because I followed my passion and came to the PGA of America.
And then how do you advise younger people to focus on their current job that they're in rather than always be thinking about that next job or the goal of their professional journey, but to focus on what they're doing?
So that's such an important point, Abe, and it gets lost, right? And I remember when we had we have kind of mentor mentee, or I've had mentor mentee relationships. And there's a gentleman, Sean Coyner, who who was at Sports Illustrated with me, is now the head of Perform's global product. And talking to him kind of about the role that he was in at the time, working on the SI on Campus product. And he was so passionate about it and so engaged in making that as good as it could be. I saw someone who was going to be successful in whatever he or she was going to be doing. And so I use that example with Sean as a point to really reflect on. People have to understand that executives and others are watching how you perform in the role that you're in. And when you bring your best effort every day to the job that you're in, and you're not perceived as trying to step to the next thing, to move beyond the focus of what you're being asked to do today, that's when opportunity is created. I'm also not a big believer in this idea of just networking and kind of having a quick connection with somebody in the industry. This industry is great because you can build relationships, you can build deeper connections where people see what your capabilities and the value that you bring because of the work that you do and the role that you're in. And so I would just reinforce to everyone who's a young emerging professional, take that opportunity in the role that you have. Think about, Abe, all the folks who are on the outside wanting that job that somebody has. Showcase why you are the best person for the next opportunity. Don't be worried about what it's going to be. If you put your best effort in where you are, 9 times out of 10, that next great opportunity will emerge because of what you've accomplished, not because of the networking that you've done.
Absolutely. Let's end with these two. As you just mentioned, young, emerging people who are looking to get into the business of sports. Let's turn the clock back. If you were a 20-something, what segments of the sports business would you be interested and focused on in terms of starting your career journey?
So there's two that jump out immediately, Abe. It's everything on the data and analytics side, not just the performance end of things, but really consumer insights, consumer data, the ability to really use information to drive business results, whether that's on the field or in the front office, or as a part of us, as a part of an association. How does that data and analytics opportunity create tremendous new opportunity for roles that never existed, right? And so that's certainly one. And then I think about the DE&I awakening that sports has had and the need that we have for talent to help lead that. I think those two areas, certainly in our organization, are where we're seeing the most growth today, because we're having to catch up from gaps that we had. But if I were kind of back in my 20s thinking, one of those two would certainly be in the consideration set if I want to be able to come to an organization and provide value. And then obviously the emergence and explosion of social and digital media is also continuing to drive, right? So if you tie all those together, those are the areas that are driving growth from my perspective in our industry, and those opportunities that we need young talent to come in and make us better.
And finish this sentence for me, the last one. The sports industry needs to do a better job of
engaging with consumers on their terms. I think we and I hope after this pandemic that the reality is there's tremendous passion for sport, but we have to be careful that the consumer, especially those younger fans, may not be following the traditional paths of the millennials following, the Gen Xers and the baby boomers. And so I think we need to do a better job of understanding those young consumers. How do we meet them on their terms so that this is an industry that continues to grow, not just for the next 5 years, but for the next decade and the decade after that?
Well, I like that. And this is Jeff Price, who I would call really, you've had so many interesting stops along your career. You've seen so many different leagues and companies. And like you said, roles. You were 40 under 40 honoree in 1999, and then again in 2000, and now Chief Commercial Officer at the PGA of America. So it's been a great professional journey, personal journey, and it's been fun to watch you. So thanks for joining us on the I Factor, and we will see you down the road, Jeff Price.
Thanks so much, Abe.
Thanks for joining SBJ I Factor today. Remember to subscribe to SBJ I Factor wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to our future episodes that will hit every 2 weeks.